and go ahead and fix this up here. If you don't find a battery in your stash, check my back office there. Have any of you ever lost or personally known someone who has experienced that tragic and sudden loss of a loved one in a traffic accident? Many of us have. Well, whether that's been personalized for you or not, most of us have seen wooden crosses like that on the side of the road, haven't we? Near that blind curve or on a fast intersection with a stop sign and no light, like up here at the top of San Juan Road in Carpinteria. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Places like that. I have seen them on San Juan Road down there near the curve, and yesterday on the way to Gilroy I saw one with a fresh bouquet of flowers on the top. So after this I expect that it'll probably catch your eye and draw your attention to it. God forbid that we should see a cluster of three. I don't think I've ever seen that, but that's what this song talks about. And it might seem a very unlikely song for our worship set, but it was a request from Ted. And so last week, and I said, well, let's see if I can bring that in on this Sunday here. And so it inspired me to take the title, to repurpose it as my message title. And as I began to work the message, it actually became the heart and soul of this message today. And by the way, please don't hesitate. If you have a song request, pass it through to me, because I like to work those in and have the message and the music customized to meet that place in you that God is speaking to you and wants to, and I want to reinforce that. I can't promise that it'll trigger the inspiration that this song did, because if you come at me with something like hound dog, you ain't nothing but a hound dog, I may have a little trouble working that and Jesus into the same message. So there's one caveat there. I'm just saying. Well, this might be a good time to pray before I get some kind of inspiration like that and go off on a tangent. So, Lord, once again, we invite you here by your Spirit, and asking God in advance that you'd open our hearts, open our minds. Lord, let this song that you've allowed me to be inspired to bring this message by, let the message penetrate, let it reflect your heart, your words, your thoughts, and that we would take them to heart and put them in practice. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Randy Travis's song tells about three people who died suddenly in a tragic traffic accident. You've heard it. Was anyone familiar with the song prior to this? There we go. Each of them left something of value behind that had a positive impact on the trajectory of someone else's life. You'll hear that word trajectory throughout this message, and it's important to what I want to say. Trajectory. What do I mean by that? Well, that's the direction we're headed. It's our flight path. It's our course of travel. That's what trajectory is. Our trajectory in life, our personal trajectory, ultimately determines where we will end up. The trajectory of an arrow determines whether it will hit the target, ideally hit the bullseye, or miss and perhaps never be seen again. Well, that picture goes well with the word hamartia. It's a Greek word for sin. If our aim is poor for lack of practice, or because we're distracted, or we're just indifferent and we just kind of go through the motions, the trajectory of our lives, hamartia, can mean to miss the mark. That is the meaning, the Greek meaning of that word, to miss the mark, to err. Hamartia is one definition of sound as forgiving. It sounds more ominous. The word fatal, that's terminal. That's the end. Flaw, that is an error. That's a mistake. It could be a giant one if it's going to end fatally. So today I want to consider the trajectory of our lives. To make sure we take time to steady our aim. To focus on the bullseye. So we don't miss the mark. Because the trajectory of our life is so important. Ted's request for 3 wooden crosses is going to help us evaluate whether our life's trajectory is headed in the direction we want to find ourselves in the end, when our time has come to meet the end. In the song, the end comes suddenly and unexpectedly, like a thief in the night, as Jesus says. He says that his coming will be that way, but millions, hundreds of millions have departed before his coming, and many, like the 3 that died in this accident, it happened suddenly, like a thief in the night, unexpectedly. Who knew? Who knew? Who knows but what this might be any one of our days? And so that's why it's really, really important to get the heart of this message. Because it could be the same for you or I. So I really think it's important for people of our vintage especially to talk candidly about end-of-life matters. And that's what this is going to address. Because I hope to do what it's done for you and quicken your heart today. Quicken. These kinds of thoughts quicken me to ask myself if I'm really about the Father's business, or if I'm drifting off course, or just pretending to be a believer without the true commitment to live as a disciple, a true follower of Christ. That's what I mean by pretending. It's not uncommon to be a pretender, but we need to own it. We need to admit it. We need to look in the mirror and look at Jesus, the plumb line, to see where we are. Are we headed in that direction, or are we distracted? Are we out of practice as we pull back our bow of our trajectory? Are we a poser, wanting to appear to be more Christian than we really are? Now, I know that's unsavory. I know that's an unsavory thought, but can you be real? Because I ask myself this very question. Am I the real deal? Or am I being a poser? Does my job require it? I get paid to be good. You have to be good for nothing. So it's easy to drift off course. Will there be, as I said last week, ask this question, if we were accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict us? Because one day we're going to stand before our Maker, and he's going to evaluate our lives. The first beatitude shows that to be the exact opposite of the blessing. To be a pretender, a poser, is the exact opposite of the blessing Jesus says belongs to those who are poor in spirit. For those, he says, the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Being poor in spirit, now nobody wants to be poor, but being poor in spirit, recognizing you are missing the mark and you can't even really get adjusted properly to be on the right trajectory, is recognizing your utter neediness of spirit, neediness for the Spirit of the living God. That's what Jesus is telling us is the very first words on the Sermon on the Mount that he is preaching ultimately the foremost to his disciples, those who would follow in his footsteps. That pretending is like a t-shirt that I had once. On the front it said, Jesus is coming. And as you turn around, on the back it says, look busy. Well, that's not a citizen of the kingdom's appropriate approach to life, is it? Jesus is coming, so I better look busy. That's the poser. That's the pretender. I better look like I'm about the business of being a follower of Christ. But our Heavenly Father, the big boss, sees where we're really coming from. He knows. You can't pull the wool over his eyes. And he knows what our real priorities are. We know what they are. We live them out every day. He sees by our choices what we really worship and what is idolatry in our lives. We might not see it so easily, but hopefully you get the picture here. And it's causing you, it's a mirror for you to look at and say, where am I in all this? To ask that question. So, let's take a closer look at the three wooden crosses in this song. As you know, the song is about three people who suddenly meet their end in a tragic traffic accident that proved to be a fatal flaw on the part of the driver. It's the chorus in one particular verse that I want to focus on today. The chorus holds the central, overarching thought behind the song. So if you have your music sheet handy, go to Three Wooden Crosses, the song we just sang, and find where the chorus says, find that song, and find where the chorus says in bold font, it's halfway down the, well, you'll find it. I guess it's not, this is the overarching thought, I guess it's not what you take when you leave the world behind you, it's what you leave behind when you go. It's not what you take with you. I've never seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul behind it. It's not what you take when you leave the world behind. It's what you leave behind when you go. So hang in with me, and I'll draw three simple questions out of this. Questions to ponder and take home with you today. That is important. Your honest answers will reveal your trajectory in life. From the chorus, we can draw the central question, just modifying what it says there. The question would be then, what will you leave behind you when you go? So to help us out, let's look at the examples of what I'll call the life song of those who suddenly met their end that day. You'll find this also in the lyrics. Bear in mind that the people represented by these three wooden crosses, just as quickly as they died, met their Maker that day, immediately stood in the presence of Christ. That's what's in store for us too. It's not just that you suddenly are gone, it's that you are suddenly and immediately in the presence of your Maker. That's a beautiful thought. If your trajectory is on course, if you're mindful of where your life is taking you, if you are about the Father's business, if not, it can be a frightening thought. To get to the end of your life and you have nothing, even if you're saved by the skin of your teeth, you have nothing to show for it. Or what you have is from yesteryear, something you did once, something along the way that you've now retired from. Wouldn't you agree that this is something we need to be thinking about as we consider our trajectory and draw closer to our end, our personal end, day by day, breath by breath? Well, here's a pleasant thought. What if the life of these three who perished, what if their life songs were sung to their Maker? Remember, as quickly as they passed away, they're going into the presence of their Maker. What if their life song, that's the term I'm going to be using for their story and for our story, what if their life song was sung by angels to their Maker to announce our arrival? What if? It could be a wonderful thought that there are angels there to welcome you, singing the song of your life to the Father as they announce your arrival. Well, it's a pleasant thought if your trajectory is towards being about the Father's business in this life. So let's have a look at what the folks left behind. First, the farmer. You'll find that in your handout. What was the farmer's life song? It says, the farmer left a harvest, a home, and 80 acres. Farmer. He's taking a vacation. He left a home, a harvest, and 80 acres. Can we agree that these are good things? Good things, although of temporal, material value, but good things for this life. In fact, they're things we even see the Bible affirm. We can read it in Proverbs 13:22, where it says, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Something to pass down. My kids should be so lucky. Right, Nancy? I mean blessed, not lucky. My kids should be so blessed. If there's anything left for us to leave behind at all, if they can even afford to bury us. Take our ashes and scatter them out in the back 40. But an inheritance can be more than material objects and money, can't it? Let me give you an example. Several years ago, at one of our association meetings, many years ago when we were going to Asilomar, one of the speakers was from the National Association in Colorado. And he was over stewardship. That was his particular focus. And he talked about estate planning. Now what we're talking about here is we're talking about things that live beyond us, left behind that live beyond us. And he suggested that people with Christian values who've invested their lives in ministry should think of how, be conscious of how they want to divide up and invest their estate, and, I believe, inform their families in advance while they're still alive. You probably know that the divvying up of an estate can be a very traumatic, divisive affair that divides families and drives a wedge between them. We've seen it firsthand, and some of you have too. The speaker asked, how much good will it do to leave everything behind to your kids? Oftentimes, the money and properties become a source of division, infighting, grief, and self-indulgence. Now, if your kids are unbelievers, if they've left your values that you've raised them in behind, is it really going to serve them or the kingdom well to give them a huge windfall injection of money and assets? It's a really practical question. And he's not saying you should give it all. He's saying you should consider what will continue what you valued beyond your own time and decide it in this life. He proposed giving a portion to your church or to ministries that you've supported when you were alive, so that it's just a continuation of that same thread. By the way, we have 2 rentals in the back. At one time there were 3. Those are all gifts bequeathed to the church by people in the past. Run down, but capable of housing a tenant, and they've been the source of involvement on our parts to refresh, remodel, renew, and to bring in good tenants and provide something for them. We wouldn't make it without those. Another generation may not make it without those and whatever else can be left behind, even though we're debt-free. Let's get back to the farmer, though. What else does the farmer's life song say that he left behind? The very next piece of that verse is the faith and love for growing things in his young son's heart. This is what the farmer is, his song is sung. that he left behind. Now there's an inheritance, isn't it? The faith and love for growing things in his young son's heart. It's wonderful to watch things grow, whether plants or animals or children, to see that process happening, to have a hand in the direction, in the trajectory that it takes. That's an inheritance that is rich in eternal spiritual value, even though you have no control over it, ultimately. I suspect a man like the farmer also left behind something that Proverbs 22:1 highly esteems. Come on in, folks. Make yourself at home. We've got chairs right up here. Happy to see you. Proverbs 22:1 highly esteems this. It's a good name. Hey, I know you people.
Hey, sorry we're late.
How nice to see you today. Eric and Carol Smith, our partners in Koopa, our leaders in Koopa. I wish Ted was here to see you today.
Right.
Hey, Proverbs 22:1 says a good name is more desirable than great riches. It's to be esteemed as better than silver or gold. This is part of that inheritance that I believe a man like the farmer, who one of the things he left behind was the faith and love for growing things in his young son's heart. I hope and pray Nancy's and my example and trajectory that we've taken and tried to establish in our children will leave behind a good name for our children. It's up to them to esteem it highly enough to pass on a good name to the next generation. We hope and pray they will. Now, if your kids are out to lunch, who should I look at? I'll look at Nancy. If your kids are out to lunch in some sense, and they're still not really, they haven't quite come of age, hopefully others have reason to consider your name a good name. Am I right? I'm gonna focus on you, Eric and Carol. As I spoke with Eric and Carol on the phone the other day, I do this a lot, not to shame you. As I spoke with them on the other day, and we were talking about Koopa and various things, Carol the two of you were just coming back from delivering food to couples, second harvest type of food to people in need. And the next time I talked to you, you didn't have much time to talk because you were on the way to taking an elderly woman to get her COVID shot. You never really retire from ministry if your trajectory is on target. And hopefully, just as in this case, your name lives beyond even what your children will do it if they happen to be out to lunch. Right? And you know what? It ain't over till it's over. The jury is not in, and it's so wonderful when the parents can see their children come of age. That doesn't always happen. So you pray for them. You intercede on their behalf. Now, what did the teacher? You find that in your song sheet. Nancy, would you give them a song sheet? You have one. If you go to the song that's just before the message, probably page 2, it's called Three Wooden Crosses. And Cher has put in bold print the verse and chorus that I'm referencing. And we're talking about the teacher here. What did the teacher leave behind? Are there any teachers present? Well, I know Cheryl is up there somewhere. Hi, Cheryl. Here's what it says. And the teacher left her wisdom in the minds of lots of children. She did her best to give them all a better start. I see it says there that the song the angel sang to her maker when she arrived was that she did her best to give them the essential intellectual, emotional wisdom. And if she was a believer, then hopefully, what we would consider eternal spiritual values. That's not so easy in the public system to do openly these days, but that message can clearly come through. How about the preacher? What could a preacher possibly leave behind? Let's look. And the preacher, remember, these people are dying or have died. The preacher still has some breath left in him, and the preacher whispered to the hooker, "Can you see the promised land?" As he laid his blood-stained Bible in that hooker's hand. I picture a woman who had likely only experienced a twisted distortion of intimacy in her life, maybe even abused herself, which led her into that kind of a lifestyle, looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. She was looking for love. She became a tool for men to show her a twisted, distorted picture of intimacy. While the preacher gave her things of eternal spiritual value. I'd like you to see this, because I see three personal grace-laden gifts that he gave her. The first one, he extended God's gracious gift of unconditional love and acceptance with his own unconditional love and acceptance. He demonstrated to her the heart of God. Not by judging her and thinking there's nothing worth redeeming here. The second thing, I'll repeat that. He extended God's gracious gift of unconditional love and acceptance with his own. Second thing, he put his own blood-stained Bible in her hand. That was his way of giving her his personal introduction to Jesus. It was also his personal user manual for life, now stained with his own and Jesus' own personal precious blood. Bible, you all know what the acrostic or the acronym for Bible is, B-I-B-L-E. I'm saying it's his user manual life, B-I-B-L-E, basic instructions before leaving earth. He put his user manual in her hand, the one that he lived by, now stained with his own blood and with Jesus' own personal blood. If you can put the picture together of what the Bible is going to show her. And the third thing, he died giving her a vision of God's promise of a purposeful life now, still time now. As the survivor of that terrible traffic accident, he gave her a vision of a purposeful life. Can you see the promised land? He puts the bloodstained Bible in her hand to introduce her to Jesus and give her a manual for life, a new trajectory for a purposeful life, both now and forever. I hope you can hear God's personal message in this for you. As I fine-tune this with some personal questions of my own, because they can reveal so much about your personal trajectory. There's one question for each of the three wooden crosses. And to set the stage, let's review that chorus again. It's not what you take when you leave this world behind you. It's what you leave behind you when you go. Let's let that set the stage for these three questions that reflect those three wooden crosses. And from that, let's see if we need our trajectories altered by the life song. Remember, that's what I'm calling this, the life song stories, examples, represented by those people with those three wooden crosses. Imagine your own life song being sung to your Maker by angels announcing your arrival. Will it bless God's heart? That's the very first thought here. Will when your life song is sung by the angels, this is all part of my fabrication, but I suspect it's not so far off. When the angels sing your life song to announce your arrival, before your Maker at the moment of death that has come suddenly, like a thief in the night? Will he say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Welcome, welcome, come on in"? Isn't that what you want to hear? So 3 specific questions from these examples. First one, might your life song, like the farmers, tell how seeds of faith and love for growing good things were planted and left behind by you? Would the angels be singing a song like that that could have words like this or similar about you, about your life, about the trajectory that you chose and that others helped you to stay on? What will you leave behind? The farmer suddenly found himself in the presence of God, and this is really important, he had a current testimony, a current investment in a future harvest. He thought he was going to be there for the harvest season himself, but he was suddenly called home. But he left this for his son, a home in 80 acres, a harvest, and a love for growing things, faith in growing things in his young son's heart. Will that be you? Or will you be found having only what remains of yesteryear's planting? It has diminished, been consumed. We need to keep our testimony. We need to keep our life song current. So, you want to add fresh purpose to your life. This is a real-time application. If you have time and a heart for the hurting, I can show you how to plant a new crop at any stage in your life. We had a speaker come to our senior luncheon representing a group called YES, Young Enough to Serve. You're the one to decide if you've thrown in the towel, if there's nothing left, if you are indifferent about your trajectory, you're distracted, no longer thinking about the years that are left, the days, the months, the years that are left for you to have a productive life. Will you be found having a current investment, or only one that remaining of yesteryear's planting? I said there was an application point here. It's as simple as praying, right? Your prayers, your time given to prayer has powerful value. But I want to add something else. Having, some exposure to Voice of the Martyrs and looking at a portion of what was broadcast the other night, you can pray and send encouragement to someone experiencing real pain, real sorrow, and real poverty of spirit, who's being a brother or sister being persecuted, one of millions around the world that are touched to know that they're not really alone. And we put flesh on that for them. We can put the skin on that with the time, with a passion for them. And that's just an example. This could go to any number of people. But it would tell me that you're not all washed up. You have time. You can pray. You can write a little card. It'll be translated. It will get to them. There's a wonderful organization that will see that happens. It is soliciting your involvement. But it's up to you to ask God, and you can also ask me how to begin. I'll hook you up. How about the teacher? Will your life song be sung like the teachers, for having done your best to help young people fill their hearts and minds with the knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual discernment? How important that is to live purposeful lives. Will you? Have you? I love the way that Doug took that. He didn't need anyone coaxing or encouragement. Doug just began to do a little session with the kids that were around here, both in the after-school daycare and in our Sunday school when we were functioning that way. The teacher's song is much like the other song that we sang today. Do you remember? Thank you for giving to the Lord. I am a life that was changed. Her song is much like that, and yours can be too. Will you be remembered for teaching and modeling how to love God, how to love your neighbor, and how to love yourself? Teaching them to love God, love others, and love themselves to the best of their ability in a healthy, wholesome way? Well, that's a wonderful tune that blesses God's heart. And then there's the preacher. He extended God's gracious gift of unconditional love and acceptance, and it strikes me that the preacher did this for the hooker. When he did this for the hooker, he was doing it for what Jesus calls one of the least of these. And the preacher was thereby doing it for Jesus, by giving her the love, acceptance, and forgiveness she would be needing. I suspect the preacher, because of his line of work, had learned to recognize the poverty of spirit and mourning in others, like that hooker. He knew that her life could just as quickly end like his without ever knowing God's will and power to give her so much more, to change her whole trajectory. She was so ready to have her trajectory changed, realigned with God's design for her life. Just like Jesus did with the Samaritan woman and the woman accused of adultery. I think the heading generally says a woman caught in adultery. It was written by men. If men were accusing her, the woman accused of adultery. So, I want to say this also. I'd rather present you with probing questions than spoon feed you pat answers. You see the difference? I want you to ask the questions. I want you to own it, because I can be just a talking head up here giving you answers, and they will mean nothing to you. In fact, they might even turn you into those pretenders who said, well, I got my daily dose. That's all I need. So, I'm going to summarize with 3 probing questions. Let me summarize then with 3 final grace-centered questions to help you get the full value of 3 wooden crosses in this song. If your life story were to be sung, who in your life has extended God's grace or is in the process or currently extending it to you? Who has or is doing that? 1 or more people. Bring them to mind. Could go way back. I just made contact with the first pastor who had huge influence in my life. And here sits my second pastors who've had huge influence in my life. Name them. And consider thanking them in word. Or if they are people who've passed on, praying. Thanking God for their influence on your trajectory. That was the first question. Second question, again, a grace-filled question. How has the grace you've received helped realign your trajectory with God's redemptive plan, like it did for the hooker? Think of the life you were living before. Your pre-salvation life that was on this trajectory that God adjusted. And it might only have been a few degrees here, but out there it makes such a vast difference. How has the grace you've received helped realign your trajectory with God's redemptive plan? Like it did for the hooker. Now, if you don't like being compared to a hooker, Remember, she's just another sinner like you. She's given a name, a classification. She's just another sinner like you. To her credit, something tells me, and you'll recognize this from last week's message, she marinated in the word of the gracious words of that preacher and his blood-stained Bible. She marinated in his words, took them to heart, and she marinated in the words found in that blood-stained Bible that he put into her hands that introduced her to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And we see in the little twist at the end of the story that she passed it on through her son to another generation. It is her son who's holding up that bloodstained Bible that is part of the life song of the hooker. She passed it on. She left that behind. Last but not least, when your life story is sung, how will it show that you've extended God's grace to someone else to help align or realign their trajectory with God's redemptive plan? Just like we heard in the song today. 3 questions there. Who are the people that have affected you, your trajectory, inputted, impacted your life? How has that grace changed you? Where were you and where are you now and where are you going? And last but not least, how will you extend God's grace to someone to help align or realign their trajectory? My message so far has been about 3 wooden crosses alongside a highway, marking the place of a tragic accident that brought them face to face with their Maker. The Bible also tells of 3 wooden crosses atop a hill at Calvary, one of which we also sang about with Alan Jackson's The Old Rugged Cross. Those crosses weren't there because of an accident, though. They were there by the wayward will of man. But God had in mind to use them for a much bigger plan, to offer a redemptive change of trajectory for all, even people hearing this message who would receive from those people on Calvary, a clear demonstration of his grace. And I want to show you what I mean by that. There at Calvary, Jesus, the sinless Son of God, hung between 2 thieves, one on his left and one on his right. They were being crucified for their crimes. I'm going to read this now and have you keep in mind that this is preparation for communion. So if you find it difficult to open these little cups, or if you don't have cups, Nancy, would you make sure that they do? Does everyone have the cups? Don't get too far ahead of yourself, but I know they can be hard to open, and so when that time comes, I just want you to be ready. I want us to be preparing our hearts to join together at the Lord's table in just a little bit. Don't be impatient. Here's the backstory. Jesus has been unjustly sentenced to death and paraded through the streets under the weight of his own cross. Scourged, spat upon, beaten, cursed, accused. And here's how it begins in Luke 23, verse 33 through 45. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then, I've checked this out, and this is the gospel that contains these words, and it's the very first words that Jesus says from the cross. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." Verse 39, one of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then that same criminal said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise." How many of us have been like the mocking crowd, the thief on the cross, at some time or other before coming to Christ? Let's not be pretenders. How many? Thank you. We see at Calvary one unrepentant thief, another sinner like us, hanging on one of 3 wooden crosses, mocking Jesus. On another cross hangs one who has come to the place of recognizing his poverty of spirit. And in the presence of Jesus, picture this, in the presence of Jesus, if you recognize your poverty of spirit, you realize your need for him that there's no other way you can meet. We see also, as in the second beatitude, he's not mourning over getting what his crimes deserve. No, in the presence of Jesus, he mourns over a purposeless life of self-seeking hamartia. Not only missing the mark, but the kind that left him, the kind left untended has become his fatal flaw, the other definition for hamartia. For the wages of sin is death. How do we balance that out? What does Paul say to balance that out? For the wages of sin is death? But the gift of God is eternal life. The man has said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." For this man, his hamartia has put him on the trajectory of eternal alienation from God. And now in the presence of God, he says, "Oh my, this is terrible. I deserve to be hanging here. But Jesus, would you just remember me?" Recognizing that Jesus is in fact King of kings, Lord of lords, and all he asks of Jesus is that he remember him for his sorrow for sin when he comes into his kingdom. And how does Jesus respond? This is so wonderful. "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Here we see God's grace shine brightest in the darkest hour. Jesus extends the same forgiveness he earlier asked the Father for at the beginning, saying in a sense with his personal royal appeal to the Father, "Father, forgive him, for he knew not what he was doing." That's the pronouncement of grace and redemption that the thief can do nothing to earn. Nothing can be done to save him but God's unconditional, everlasting love and grace. And the same is true for us. But we can declare being set apart through the sacrament of baptism, something he couldn't do. The thief couldn't observe that sacrament right alongside of communion that we're about to take, coming to the Lord's table. He couldn't observe the sacrament of baptism, and it kind of just makes it very clear, you don't have to be baptized to be saved, but you do have to be baptized to be identified and set apart as a believer. It's your formal acknowledgement that you know you can't do it without Jesus. That is the poor poverty of spirit that brings you to that point. We know of Jesus' assurance that he would be with him in paradise. Baptism doesn't save us. And we can welcome and even pray for a change of trajectory and the opportunity to offer the same to others. One more thing we must do to show that we've been set apart, reminding you and repeating what I said last week, is to be regularly marinating in the Word of God, to know and obey the commands of Christ that declare our love for him. So as we prepare to take the communion elements together, the question is, what will your life song say about you? Paul tells us to examine ourselves so we don't drink condemnation upon ourselves. You're not going to do all of that examination here before taking of the elements. But it is up to you to take the questions, the quest home with you. If you're just going through the motions, it's not too late to confess your poverty of spirit and the grief of knowing that you're feeling far from God. You know, and that's just leaving it up to a feeling. You might not even be feeling that. You might be indifferent to it. Your conscience might be seared if neglected too long. Well, now is the time to ask God as we take communion for a redemptive adjustment in your trajectory. So like the people in the song represented by 3 wooden crosses on the side of the road, and like others you may know, you too can finish strong. Paul says that on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread and broke it and gave thanks. And with that together, we take the symbol of his body broken for us, where he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." He also asked to be remembered by the likes of us. And it says that in the same way, after supper, he took the cup. I think it's in the reverse order. We like to wash the dry cracker down with the cup. I think the order is reversed in some renderings. But taking the cup, he once again says, "Thank you, Lord, thank you for this cup of redemption." And we take it together in remembrance of his blood shed for us. The body and blood of Christ given for us. I want to leave you with this thought. I'm going to keep on repeating it until you boo me off stage. I'm going to leave you with this thought as we prepare to sing our closing song. Closing song being, when it's all been said and done, there's just one thing that matters. And we'll fill in the blanks as we sing it. One thing that matters, what will you leave behind when you go? And I'm not talking about your work saving you. I'm just talking about how will you be recognized? We're going to take the offering, but I'm going to do that after we go off camera here, along with singing that last song, because we can't put those on the net without having copyright violations. So with that, I want to just close out this portion now. We'll sing that song, we'll take the offering, and then I will say a blessing upon you.